There we go. Okay. Welcome all to the UAC meeting. So we'll get started. I guess first thing we'll do is just make sure that everything, all the postings were done. Shannon?
Agenda was posted in accordance with the Nevada Open Meeting Law. All members are present with the exception of Howard Anala.
Okay, thank you. So we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance then. Oops, sorry. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I guess we'll open it for the first public comment, which is just to do with the agenda. Anything that anybody's got a comment on the agenda. So do we have anything that
We did not receive any written comments.
no written comments? Okay. So no written or email or anything? Okay. So we'll open it up to the phone line, so which is 702-589-9629. So again, the number is 702-589-9629. We'll give it just a few more beats, and then we'll continue on. Just while we're waiting, just to confirm that since this one is related to the agenda, the comment period at the end is a little wider aspect, so if you need to and miss this one, you can call in at the end of the meeting. So we will go ahead and close the first comment period and go to the agenda. Does the city have anything with the agenda that wants to be rearranged or anything? Everybody happy with the agenda?
Yeah, everybody's good.
Okay, anybody here that, I don't see a reason to readjust it, but just want to make sure. Okay, so we'll start with agenda item number 1 for possible action, approval of May 6th Utility Advisory Committee minutes. Does anybody have any comments on any of the minutes? Ken? Okay, I didn't have any comments either, so does somebody want to make a motion?
I'll move.
Any second?
I'll second.
So the motion has been made to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. It passes unanimously. Okay, so then we will go to action item number 2, or agenda item number 2. For possible action, adoption of recommendation of City Council on the fiscal year 27-29 utility revenue requirement, selection between 2 options. So, okay.
Okay, I'll take it from here. This is George Kahn. So before we get on to the items to present to you, I wanted to first thank the committee chair for all of the hard work and detail you put into the study by FCS. It's been really helpful, and actually we've made some changes, and you'll see them in a moment to some of the slides, so thank you for that. Also to city staff, especially Jennifer, Angela, Shannon, Marvis, and Joel, for the hours they have spent providing data to FCS that they could use in order to prepare the information necessary for this decision. So with that, let me turn it over. I'm going to go through the slides, and then at the final slide will be an action item to bring before the committee to make a recommendation. So the first slide.
George, quickly, so
Sure.
there's only a few slides, but do you want questions during each slide, or wait, you prefer to go through all three slides first?
It could depend on the question, but I think it would be helpful if you've got questions, raise them during the slide. There aren't that many slides.
That, I just make sure whichever.
Right.
Okay.
So the first slide shows you where we sit on the timeline for all the activity related to FCS. And also, let me thank FCS, because I think FCS has done an incredible job of accumulating lots of information, much of which is somewhat atypical for a large utility, from a city utility that's integrated within the rest of the city and able to cull that information out to make a recommendation. They really have done an outstanding job for the city. So the timeline, as you can see, we are now on July 8th. So FCS was hired. They conducted a number of meetings. They made a presentation at the last UAC meeting on the general revenue requirements for the utilities, and we are here today to act upon that recommendation, meaning that that would be a recommendation from the UAC to the City Council to be held at the meeting as outlined in this slide. The next agenda item after we complete this one will be a review of the cost of service element by FCS, which will show how they've looked at the individual ways that customers, commercial, residential, and industrial customers are charged for the services they received and how much they actually pay for that. That will be an issue that staff will be looking at over the next year and will bring back recommendations, if any, to the UAC. Next slide. If you got a question, just,
I've got comments on that slide.
okay.
Okay, so I guess the couple things, we'll start at the presentation of the UAC recommendation, the
Thanks.
August 25th. So would the August 25th have the draft rate resolutions, or would that be somewhere after August 25th?
The draft resolutions would not be going to City Council on that August 25th meeting. They would be reviewing the study and the information provided from FCS and then advising staff how to move forward with drafting those resolutions.
Okay. So that would be somewhere on the 8th. Well, you've got the business impact, okay, considered. So would that be the resolution probably on the 8th or the 22nd?
The 22nd would be where the resolutions would be presented to council.
And then if they had some recommendations, then they would come back with that, and then you'd have just a quick turnaround to get it finalized.
Yes.
Okay. So the committee won't see the resolution because our next meeting is October. Is there a chance we could get at least a draft of that when the draft comes out of the resolution? Because usually we can advise on the resolution and we won't have that opportunity for this time.
I'll take that back and I'll talk with Public Works Director on that.
Okay.
So if I can add, the resolutions will be the sum of the recommendation that if you make one today, the feedback from the council, the adjustment to that. So it might go through a number of iterations, or it might just be the recommendation that you make.
Well, it would still have to be, it's got to be more than 5%, and I think it would be more than the recommendation, because each rate has to change. So just understanding how the overall, how it's written would be
Okay.
advantageous.
Got it.
So, because you're not just going to put in a comment that is raised by 5%. Each aspect has to be modified, or several aspects have to be modified.
Right. It'll be far more detailed than what we're going to be talking about
Exactly. So
today.
it'd be nice to see it.
Okay.
That's all. So the same type thing then we're dealing with is the draft report, and then the final report. Do we expect the final report for the study to be done before October, or not? Do we know from SCS?
I think we need to check with FCS on that one.
Okay, because then if we would have input, if we can see the draft report before October, or at least discuss it on the October meeting, then we would have, maybe have a little bit input for the final
So I
report.
believe we have FCS on the line. Are you there?
Yes. This is Angie Hamrick. Our plan is to get that draft report to you most likely right after the August 25th meeting. So if we could take any feedback from that city council meeting, but that would be our potential timeline.
So what is the timeline for the final report, though? When do you foresee having the, or wanting to have the final draft done?
It would probably just depend on if there was any, extensive changes or updates, but after that, we would look to get it to you within, a couple of weeks if there were mostly no changes or updates to the draft. So it would come pretty quickly after that.
So I believe the agenda item has, I would think, would have a little bit of wiggle room to discuss it among us. If this is a preference of the committee or not, does anybody have a problem with that? So discuss the draft compared to the final. The way I see it, if the final's done, we would have no say if the final's done before October.
So the final, as I understand it, the final draft will be based on the draft that's provided to city council with their feedback, and provided whatever feedback the council gives to edit the draft accordingly.
But isn't this committee still part of that review? Normally, that's what we would be. That's a revenue requirement, so we would advise
Okay.
on it. And so in this case, if it's done before October, then if we can at least get a sense, and then if each individual can send their comments to you, that would be one way to do it. Otherwise, we would have no advisement on that. So the end of the study would end without us having any further advisement.
So I'm sure we could provide a revised draft based on what FCS does after the council meeting.
Okay. And yeah, so I guess if you could send that individually to us, then that would be, if I'm understanding you correctly.
I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I think that it needs to be recognized that the city council will have the final say on what gets done.
Of
But that
course.
doesn't mean that you can't take a look at it and make comments.
Right, and that's usually, that's where it gets confusing. Sometimes it's stated that the council has to see it, then we see it. But if we're advising the council, we have to see it at some time before. It would be, I would assume we'd want to give our advisement before they make their final advisement. And if the final report comes after the fact that we have our time, then that's not happening. Am I missing anything? Does the committee agree with me on this?
Can we do that without having a meeting?
One of the things, like I said, I want to do is I want to sit down with Public Works Director and talk that through. I don't see any reason at the moment why it wouldn't be that way, but again, I would want to sit down with him and talk it over.
No, I understand, and I'm not, but it's just, I think it's best to get it on the record.
Yeah,
That this is
understood.
what we would like. And
Sure.
So if everybody else is agreeing, then I'd prefer to have it in the minutes.
Sure, but I thought the committee couldn't make decisions without having a meeting. We can individually
Make
make
decisions with,
recommendations to you guys through email. I didn't think that was allowed.
To my knowledge, as an individual, and as long as we're not communicating together, that is, it can be done.
yeah.
Real quick, sorry.
Okay.
So we'll have to look at it and set up. If we're going to get this out to you, you'll make your recommendation, advisement to council. Council has any changes, we'll get you the draft. If there is recommendations after that, we would have to schedule. We'll have to look at that and talk to Tammy. See, I think we do have to schedule another meeting.
So it just, okay, because like I said, this recommendation is just a very big, so what, this rate study is not following the normal procedure, because we're trying to get a rate out by October. So normally, the committee would interact on all these different procedures. And if we don't have another meeting and the final comes out before October, it would not be our normal procedure, just to advise. We're
Yeah,
not
if
approving
we
it,
need
we're
to
just
set up
advising.
another meeting, this meeting right now is so we could have another presentation and also have recommendations with a couple options that we could go forward to meet these deadlines. If another meeting is required, then we could set something up, but it will not include FCS unless we amend their contract.
No, then that's fine, but like I said, I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So the presentation, the next presentation is to the council.
To the council,
Right.
correct.
And so the draft would still be just how, so usually the draft has their overall recommendation. So whether that overall recommendation, well, we still don't know what the overall recommendation. So after today, we will not know FCS formal overall recommendations to city council.
On the rate study, or what's the other portion?
No, on the options,
No, just on the rate study, the whole rate study, the
Yeah.
completed rate study, the different procedures that they went through. So there was 4 or 5 steps they were going through, with the final
you're
step being the rate
talking
design.
revenue requirement, cost of service, that all the way down is what
Yes,
you're?
uh-huh.
Yeah, so we've extended FCS an extra 3 months, so we can go through that. This is, this recommendation, these options are going to be based off of the revenue requirement.
Oh, right.
Solely.
So then, okay, then make sure I understand. So so then the final report could be done after October meeting, the October meeting then.
The overall rate study,
The overall rate study final draft report.
the overall, correct.
Yes,
So
and that's
this one is specifically for the revenue requirement.
Correct.
Yeah,
And that's, so, yeah.
yeah. So
Trying to
after the
clarify.
October, the overall rate study is not finalized yet. This will just be, what we're doing right now, option 1 and 2 is for the revenue requirement.
Okay, see, because I guess I wasn't clarified, I wasn't in that timeline. I understood that we would have time to comment on things afterwards, but not necessarily how.
So on the
how we
structure of the
interact with
rate itself, that's that's
How we
something
would
that,
interact with the final aspect of the consultant, FCS.
there'll be another UAC meeting.
Okay, then
Right.
then the October will work.
So, so right now, and that's what we bringing back, where we can look at the tiers on that, the
Okay, we
different
need,
tiered
then
rates.
maybe we need to confirm one more
So-
time with the consultant, because I thought I heard him say that they wanted to, this would be the draft report that's going to the council.
Today,
No, in the 25th of August.
Angie, you want to key in on that?
It is the draft report going to council on the
And they said
25th.
within a few weeks, they'd want to finalize it. That would be before October. So
Right.
I'm just trying to clarify the timeline.
So let me move back for a second. Today's meeting, today's recommendation it will not be a recommendation for FCS to the city council. The recommendation will be from the UAC to the city council, based on what you're going to discuss today. So that will be the recommendation. FCS job is to create the information necessary in order for the UAC to make a recommendation to city council. They will provide the draft report on the 25th, which will go over all the items that you have already seen, both from the previous meeting and today's meeting, and the council may or may not have changes to that. They may suggest something different. They may suggest something different than what UAC has recommended. If they do make recommendations, and they're significant and changes, and they're needed for another review because there's additional information that you have not seen that the council directed, then there might be a good reason for a review, and we'll talk about exactly how we do that within the constraints of Nevada state law. If not, there may be a final draft submitted on the 25th. However, the final draft will not have final recommendations on the element of cost of service that will be discussed after this agenda item. That's an item that we need to review over the next year, and you'll see why during the presentation, that we will need to bring back to UAC for a number of meetings to discuss if there are any recommended changes.
And I think the big thing is going to be the rate design, and that's really what it's going to come, I think, more.
Right,
of a
and that's what I'm
discussion.
referring to as to be brought back over the next year because it takes more detail.
No, I understand that, but like I said, just trying to clarify, and is that in the rate studies we've done in the past, in a normal procedure, you have a draft, so that when the consultant is done, then before they're done, they have a draft report that covers all of their stuff. So that's gonna cover the rate design and everything. And then and we would have a option to see the recommendations. For instance, in one of the recommendations, I think we had in the draft, it was like 10 to 15 different recommendations. And as we go through and we say, well, can we tweak this recommendation? We would like to advise that maybe we can tweak this recommendation or something like that. So in the draft report, we would have some idea, because if I understand correctly, before the study is done, you would have the draft and the final report is gonna go over everything. It's gonna go over cost of service and go over rate design. They're
Correct.
gonna say what they want.
What their recommendation.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah,
thank you, sorry about that.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you for
going to be up to
clarification.
the UAC and staff to figure out what recommendations we're going to be presenting to council.
Correct, but so it'd be better to have a look at the rate, so I guess what I'm just trying to make
Let
sure.
me,
I
let me
understand-
I'll clarify for you. You're definitely going to have the opportunity to see after the October. So once the draft is in place, you're going to see it after the October council. So
Okay.
what we're focusing on right now is revenue requirement to get that through.
I hear that,
Yep,
I
yep.
just want to make sure, because
Yep.
I was hearing two
And,
separate things.
and
when
I know
was
the
here.
concern is that we make sure we revisit rate study or rate design after the next year and following years, and to make sure that we do our due diligence on the rate structure itself.
Yes, because that's
Yeah.
what's not on
Yep.
this timeline. The
Yep.
timeline just cost of service,
Yep.
and the rate design is actually more important.
So
than
we
the cost
will
of
visit
services.
this annually.
I appreciate that,
Yep.
so, okay.
Could I ask one thing?
Sure.
The August 25th, is that a city council meeting? That's going to be, okay.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if you remember the last meeting, we went through a couple of alternative scenarios for utility rate requirements. And we have before you today two alternatives for you to consider. Between the two alternatives, what's on this chart is what is similar between the two alternatives. There's a $3 million transfer from the Rate Stabilization Fund to help fund capital. It will be replenished by the water utility beginning in FY 2028. There's a $2.15 million loan from the water fund to electric in FY 2029 to FY 31 to be repaid by electric beginning in 2032. Both alternatives maintain adequate capital and operating reserves. They fund all utility revenue obligations. And as we just talked about, we're not recommending any changes to cost of service elements for the reasons we just talked about. So these things are identical between the two alternatives.
Do you have any comments on this slide?
Well, we're going to make a recommendation for one of these options, correct?
Yes, and I'll get to that. I wanted to make sure that I've covered what's similar between the two before going to what's different between the two.
Yeah, and just to be clear, these are for both options. This is what is going to be in both options.
So if I can clarify, so I believe the 3 million and the 2.5 million are only if needed. It looks like they're needed, but I guess it would just be, in case we don't need, we're not automatically doing this,
Well, your recommendation will be to authorize it to be done.
if need, okay.
Uh,
I guess
the
I'd
way-
prefer to say if needed, but that's fine.
Right, so we're relying on the data that the city put together, that FCS compiled, to know whether or not it's needed. So based on their data and their information, it is needed. Obviously, if it's not needed, it's not going to be used, but it's important for the committee to understand that these recommendations authorize the use of both of those.
Okay,
And also 2 points of clarification. So it's $3 million from the rate stabilization reserve, not fund.
Thank you.
And the other one is the water fund utilization is not 2.25, it's 2.15 million.
okay, sorry, thank you. And then, so the last one is just to clarify, the next slide has it. The next slide shows that we would be recommending it through 31, and I definitely believe we should only do it for 2 years. But if, for 5 years, it would be hard to say there'd be no changes to the cost of service.
That's
factor.
actually one of the things that George is going to bring.
Right, so that was the commendation I gave you earlier over finding something that was incorrect in this slide, which was that it should be FY '29 and not '31.
Okay.
Because so the slide, so the two options, the first option is is the option that was presented at the last meeting, which you discussed, which was a 5% increase for electric and wastewater, and a 3.5% increase for water and landfill. And one of the comments that was provided at our last meeting was a concern of deplenishing the rate stabilization account and doing that too quickly, because we may need that rate stabilization account for issues that come up in the future, such as power purchase costs, reduced hydro, reduced water, things like that. So based on those comments, we are providing an option number 2, which is a 5% increase for all utilities till FY '29. That should change there as well. And that would encourage a quicker replenishment of that rate stabilization account. So those are the two options presented to you. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to move forward on any action that the committee wishes to take on those. Are there any questions on the alternatives?
I think that would be before we're asking for a motion or something, I think that's what we need to do now, is just make sure there's no comments or discussion needed among the committee.
Right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to handle that. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm just going to do I'm going to revisit the options, and I'm going to read the department's recommendation. So, financial, the recommended adjustments are designed to keep each utility fund at or above its reserve policy target across the forecast periods, with rates effective October 1st, 2026. Under option 1, electric holds to a 5% path by utilizing $3 million from the rate stabilization reserve and $2 million, it's actually $2.15 million from the water fund, with repayment of the water fund utilization beginning in 2032 over 5 years. Water and landfill increase only to the extent each utility is required. Option 2, the additional revenue from raising water and landfill from 3.5% to 5% strengthens the combined fund and reduces or shortens the interfund replenishment option 1 relies on. At the cost of charging water and landfill customers above their individual utility need, electric and wastewater are 5% under both options. So department's recommendation that the Utility Advisory Committee adopt a recommendation to the City Council on the revenue requirement for electric, water, wastewater, and landfill utilities by selecting either option 1 or option 2 as presented in this report. This action addresses the revenue requirement and the annual percentage rate adjustment per utility only. Cost of service allocation and rate design are presented separately and will return for action at subsequent meetings. So are there any questions on the options?
Do you have any figures about option 1 and option 2, how much increase in funding you're going to get for, and it's for 2 years, right?
It's for, yes. Actually, I'm going to reach out to Angie if you could help with those numbers. I don't have them right in front of me. I know we did an average.
Let me grab that quick.
Sure.
So this is George. Are you asking how much additional revenue will be collected?
Well, what you estimate, the
Estimate.
additional revenue for 2 years, right?
It's 3 years, FY '27, '28, and '29.
Starts in October 26
Right.
and goes till October 29, correct?
October 26th till.
I mean, the fiscal year kind of
Right,
gets
yeah.
confusing.
Yeah,
You
so
got
it'd be,
it.
we're
So
doing
for
this
3 years,
3
you would
years.
increase the revenue of those 2 utilities. The not the water and the power, the other two. And you must have some kind of a figure how much increased revenue you're going to get from those 3 years, approximately, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's where Angie's going to give you those
Yeah,
figures.
so I had summarized it recently in a statement just for fiscal year 27, so I can, while we're on the call, look at the additional 2 years, but it's right around 1.4 million, 1.458, with the electric having the highest increase of 925, water 393, and then wastewater is 94,000, and landfills 46,000. So that's what we were looking at for fiscal year 27.
So that was with the 5 and the 3.5%,
That's
correct?
that is actually the 5%
The 5% for all four?
across the board.
Across-
the board.
Okay.
So you don't really have the figures of option one, option two increase in revenue in front of you, or do we have to do the math, or?
Yeah, I would just have to look those up.
I'm sorry, I can't quite understand you.
She's going to review.
figuring it
Yeah,
out
she's
now.
looking at it right now. She actually has it.
Okay,
She's just looking it
gotta pull
up.
out.
So,
Okay.
so you're asking for the delta, the 1.5%?
Yeah, I mean,
for those
3
two that-
years, I
right.
mean, we know it's gonna be 5%. It shouldn't be that hard to
Right.
figure out. We're gonna have an increased revenue of $50,000 for the first year and, 100,000 for the next year, something along those orders, so we can know
Right.
what we're voting for.
Well,
Yep.
the problem is, it'd be nice to see, because I believe the fiscal year 26 revenue was estimated at a higher amount than had been estimated in the budget that the city had put together for fiscal year 26. So it'd be nice to see how the fiscal year 26 actually comes in, because the revenue would be based similar on that amount, I would believe. I believe, like for electrical, it went up to 18 million. We've only been seeing about 17 million. So if for some, and currently, unfortunately, the city manager report was only gone through April, but it was like at 13 million. So it'd have to be 5 more million May and June to come up to 18 million, or, yeah, close to it. You'd still have I guess there'd be some funds coming in. So that's, if we're not necessarily getting the revenue requirement, then the 5% across the board is probably needed. If we're getting the 18%, my thought would be that for 3 years, I'd hate to see the 5% straight across the board. I'd prefer the 5, 3.5, and 5, the option one. But so that's part of the problem with not having the final 26 numbers, is so what we're doing is, and I just repeat myself, they're basing it on the similar aspect that they're basing 26 on. If 26 doesn't come in the same way they thought, then is 27, 28, and 29 going to come in the same way? You see what I'm saying? So then you would hedge on the 5% across the board going forward. If they do come in, then I would prefer to hedge on using the 5 and 3.5% myself. Does that make sense to everybody?
Well, you're talking about not choosing option two then, changing option two.
No, I would
right?
you choose option one for 3
Or
years.
option one.
Yeah, and then option two is what they're suggesting is straight 5.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously, we're gonna make a decision, but we're not gonna change the option one and option two. That's already set in stone, right?
Right.
Okay, so I was just curious, it's like interest, isn't it? If you charge 5% for the first year, and then if we choose option two, and you tack on 5% of that rate, it compounds, doesn't it? Am I looking
Yeah.
at that correctly?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
It does. So we
And-
are gonna see revenue increase every year that we do this for the 3 years.
Right.
Based on the different options we pick, one or two. Okay.
That is correct, and the charts, the work that FCS did showed that that's what's needed to maintain the utilities' revenue requirements to do it, and it does affect it like that. It's not a one-time increase.
And the other thing I wanted to clarify for the audience out there is the extra money you get from option two is gonna go where?
It's going to go back for repayment of the fund, of the reserve.
Of the 2 million, or of the 3 million, or the 2 million, or? I'm a little confused on that.
So the water is going to pay back the 3 million, and then the electric will be funding the 2.15 million, starting in 2028, I believe.
Because we're gonna pay back the water fund,
Correct.
no matter what happens with option one or option two.
Correct. They're both already included in option one and two. It's just a faster way of paying it.
I'm just still confused about where that money's going. Is anybody
So-
else confused about it?
No, it's what they're
If we
doing,
choose option 2.
the option 2 will increase water, which will give us more reserves in water.
So they'll have an increased fund for emergencies and all that stuff, correct?
It's to fund back the rate stabilization, yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But again, at this point, because just to clarify, so unless I was missing something, what was in the spreadsheet in the slides last time was the 5 and a 3.5. It was not a straight across 5.
So that's, yeah, that would be option 1.
Right, and that's correct. And we added the 5% as an option because of the concerns the committee had for depleting that rate stabilization and wanting it to be available. So this option, the 5% just means that there will be a little more flexibility in paying back that fund. If it's just the 3.5%, that fund will still be paid back, but it'll take longer than if you have the 5%.
But I think one of the things too, for 3 years, hopefully we'll be studying this, so we'll probably make a modification before 29, I'm hoping, because it's hopefully we'll have a rate design and something into effect. But if for some reason we didn't, I don't think we have that much capital in water. It looks like if I was looking at some of the data properly, that some of the water would still have a reasonable amount of reserves, more than is needed.
Right.
And so you would still have within the utility fund, you would still have enough reserves to cover a reasonable amount of emergencies. So you still have the 5 million for capital, and then you would have a reasonable amount in some of the other programs for the rates for energy or water. And then also, if you put 5% in landfill, it's not gonna be that much anyway. It's not gonna give us that much revenue. But we haven't utilized, I don't believe, the amount that we have in maintenance, and I don't believe that the study shows that so you have two funds in the landfill, the closure fund and the capital fund. And so part of the reason that we were increasing landfill, I believe, was because of the fencing and there was some little additional capital. But I don't believe that the capital that was in the reserves that has not been touched yet and was separate from the capital was not included in FCS's. So that's part of the thing, is that we ask for some changes, and some of the things are going to be done, but this is still based on stuff without the changes. So without the changes, then theoretically, the 3.5 and stuff would do pretty well. And with the changes, then you're going to get a little bit extra. And if we find out how 26 works in 27, then by the time we want to look at 29, so it'd be in fiscal year 28.
Right,
we'd be looking at it.
and the best way to describe it is we're forecasting. We have to be able to forecast it. Unfortunately, 26 isn't over yet, so we have to be able to forecast ahead.
No,
And I understand exactly what you're saying, but in finance and all that, which you're well aware of, that's what they got to do. They got to go off forecasted numbers.
I'm just trying to explain
And
what
the landfill-
my position on 1 and 2 is.
Sure. And the landfill itself, there's also an expansion. So we want to be able to look at expansion over the next years because of our growth. As small as it is, it's still growth.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, okay,
It's also important to note the rate stabilization is for all utilities.
correct.
So it's a cushion for all utilities, depending on what happens. In this case, it's the electric utility that needs to take some of that cushion. And water, if you just select the 5%, will be able to repay that quicker.
So the money goes into a fund for all utilities. It doesn't go into the wastewater or into the
No,
disposal.
it's a fund that can be used
correct?
for all the utilities.
yeah,
Okay.
there's a fund
It
for
just
water and a
increases it up for
reserve.
everybody.
Right.
Well,
There's
just
two.
Make sure the funds are going to go to where they're collected, they're going to go to each individual account. But yes, that's what's going to happen, because that's what you're doing. If I change this 3.5% to 5% for water, water's going to collect 5% more. It's going to go into water's
Yeah, but doesn't it
funds.
go to a fund for all utilities that they could take out?
So they're each individual funds. So it's, what you're asking, are they going to, like a general fund, they're all going to, no.
Oh, it
It's
does,
got to go
okay.
into the specific, their enterprise fund. So it's
Okay.
got to go into electric, it's got to go into water, it's got to go into wastewater, landfill.
So we're basically increasing wastewater and.
Correct.
And disposal funds higher, but the other the others don't change for each option, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
And
wanted to
and we're very blessed as a city to be able to have the ability to fund ourselves, give ourselves a loan, so.
Yeah, no, it is, that's, the pay-as-we-go is a big advantage compared to having debt, so I agree with that. And so I'm just trying to point out the different things, for, again, 3 years, I would probably prefer to go with option one for 3 years, myself, and that was just my comments, but what does everybody else think? So before we vote, just so everybody can have their comments, so.
I guess it really doesn't matter what happens with the power purchase agreements with the dam as far as these rate, option one and option two, because option two funds can't be used for the electric utility if it goes sky high, because all of a sudden we have to buy this power? Or is the ability for the city in the next 3 years to borrow money again from the increased revenue from the 5% versus option one and option two, if that does go sky high? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And again, we don't know how much money yet. She's working on that.
So I'm not going to try to determine how the city does its accounting, but the rate stabilization is contributed to by all accounts. And if it goes, and actually, it's good that the city has a rate stabilization fund because of what you just said, because it will be needed. But the difference between the two options are, do you have a little more cushion to do it quickly or not? And if you don't have that cushion and we need it, we're going to have to find it. Or we're going to have to come back and say, okay, we need more cushion. This is just a way to be more proactive and forward-looking to be able to drive that. And it's based on comments from the last meeting we had.
That's the reason I like the option two.
Me too. I'm favoring towards option two, but again, I don't know how much money we're talking about until we figure that out. It's kind of,
Angie, you can chime in anytime.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
You can also cut us off too if we're not making sense.
I was focusing on water, so just because that's the biggest impact. And I looked at 27, 28, and 29. The difference, like in 27, is about 117,000. It goes up to about 290,000 and about 470,000 in 29. You're looking at about $900,000 impact between a 5% and a 3.5%. I think that's the question.
yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I
so
was thinking it was going to be a lot less, so that's, because there's not a lot of money in disposal, I would think, but water, wastewater, I think there would be. Yeah.
Correct.
And as you said, that's the part of the problem, is you're compounding it. By
Mm-hmm.
using 5%
Exactly, yeah.
instead of 3.5, you're compounding it for 3 years.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards option two because I think in the next 3 years, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening. And the city's going to have to find some revenue and,
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty,
Uncertainty,
especially in the
exactly.
energy, the power end of it. We're always looking forward to try to put our best foot forward as far as power and energy goes, but, you
and
never know.
everybody
And-
fears about this AI and these buildings that are going to suck the power out of the valley, and then we're going to have to go out and purchase power. It kind of makes sense in a way, so, I mean, that's what I'm leaning towards is option two.
Well, I guess just to help me a little bit too, is to make sure, so if we're gonna be going over the rate design in the next year and then see what happens. So if we have a rate design, we have to change the resolutions anyway. And I would think that, because from what I've looked at my background information, we haven't really had a good look at the actual rate design since 2002. And so I think it would be advantageous to see how some of the different designs might want to be modified.
And I know one of your concerns is, preparing the resolution and all that, but as a committee, I wouldn't worry about that. That's our worry. We'll take care of the resolutions. If we have to create a resolution to get something done, that's what we're here for, so.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that, because
Yep.
it has, so
It's part of our job, it's
that's,
part of what we
so
do.
then we're not necessarily locking it in for 3 years. If nothing else happens, then it will be for 3 years. Otherwise, we can change the resolution to be more what looked like is,
Yeah, it could turn out that we do 0 changes in a year, or we change it, or, like Randall's saying, it could change fast. So, yeah, revisiting it annually is a good thing for us.
I think that helps too. You know, if we're not gonna revisit it, then it makes it a little harder to say, okay, we're gonna do compounded.
Yep.
But if we're gonna revisit it, especially if, you know, next year, then year after that, then we're saying, okay, can we tweak it a little bit?
Right. I think to ease your mind a little bit, just know that we plan to revisit it.
Okay. Okay, any comments, Mike?
No.
So then I guess what you want is you want a motion from us to which option we want?
Go ahead, I got it. That'd be correct.
And then, and so then it will be changed to 29, so the recommendation's gonna be, so right now, it's, because the paper we have is still 31, so that's gonna be changed to 29.
So if I could make a suggestion to make it easier for the committee, I think if you make a motion to select option 1 or option 2 with the change to FY '29, based on what Jamie said earlier, you probably could cover it, because you basically recited the motion without selecting an option.
And you could say based on department recommendation.
So we only have to make one motion and we'll vote on option 1 or option 2. And we only have 4 of us here, correct? He's not, okay. I'll make a recommendation that we vote on option 1 or option 2 with the fiscal year '29 changes.
Didn't you want a specific?
You're going to have to do, a specific
That's what I thought,
motion.
because I didn't know how to vote for you. I don't think we
Yeah.
can
You-
So we are going to do 2 motions.
You're going to do a motion,
Hey,
because it's going to be your recommendation.
So
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we recommend option 2.
I'll second that.
Okay?
So then I guess as chair, then I just will go for the vote then, right? Okay, so the motion on the table is to approve or advise for option number 2 with the change of it going until 29, fiscal year 29. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. It passes unanimously.
Okay? So now we'll move on to the second portion with FCS presenting the cost of service.
Correct. We will close out agenda item number 2 and go to agenda item number 3. So for possible action, discussion of the cost of service analysis of ongoing utility rate. And so we'll turn it over to FCS.
Yes, Angie, it's your show.
And Angie, just
So
let
there's
me
a
know
call
when you're
here.
ready. Oh, let me know when you're ready to move the slides forward, and I will move them for you.
So thank you. Today I'll be walking through the electric cost of service portion of today's presentation. So let's go to the next slide, Shannon.
I apologize, your audio is broken up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you sound a little digital.
Do I sound digital still?
Yeah.
If you could maybe talk just a little bit slower, I think we could understand you a lot better. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. Or my hearing aids.
He's breaking up.
So sometimes with this problem, if I connect and reconnect, it'll solve it. We can try that.
Yes, please
Yeah,
try
go ahead.
that.
All right, can you guys hear me better now?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Better? Okay, great. So again, my name is Paul Quinn. I'll be walking through the electric cost of service. So before we get into the electric numbers, I just wanted to talk about, high level, what a cost of service is. Why do we perform this type of analysis? The big question that cost of service answers is, what does it cost us to serve our different customer groups? You know, is there cost differences that exist in serving different types of customers? So that's the major question that we're answering here. In order to do so, we've taken a look at, you know, the unique demands that your customer groups place upon the system. We've taken a look at all your different assets and costs and determined, you know, what is that asset performing, what function, what service is it performing for our customer, in order to determine what it costs us to serve those customers. So like I mentioned before, the big question that we're going to answer is, what does it cost us to serve our customers? But a second, more granular outcome from this analysis is the unit cost. So we develop on a cost basis, what does it cost the utility on a per kilowatt hour basis to serve our customers, or per kilowatt basis, and on a per customer per month basis. That type of information can then be used as a guide if we do want to do any sort of rate design structural changes. So let's go to the next slide, Shannon. And you can skip to the next one. So in terms of the overall process for the electric cost of service, we like to think of it as a three-step process. Once we've gotten the revenue requirement pretty much finalized, which is what we just discussed, we're going to take all the different cost elements that make up the revenue requirement for the utility. The first step, we're going to functionalize those costs, and what we're asking ourselves there is, what function, you know, do our salary and benefits, do our different cost line items, do our different assets, what function do they perform for the utility and our customer? We have 4 different functions that we're breaking out our costs into. The first one, power generation. Those are costs that are related to, you know, purchasing the power, the electricity that we're selling to our customers. The second function is transmission. So those would be local transmission assets or the associated operating and maintenance expenditures on those assets. The third one is distribution. So any distribution related asset like a substation, pole, wire, transformer, and the associated operating and maintenance costs would end up in that distribution function. And finally, we have dedicated customer type costs. Examples of those would be like utility billing or some sort of customer service cost. Once we have the cost functionalized, we move on to step 2, which is taking each one of those 4 functions, and we're further breaking down, we're further classifying those costs into cost pools, which are one of the 3, either demand, energy, or customer. And we'll talk a little bit about those in a couple slides. And finally, the third step is, once we have the cost into the cost pools, it gives us an ability to allocate those costs to our customers based on how they're using the system, you know, based on how the energy needs they're placing on the system, based on how they're peaking, based on how many accounts or customers they represent. So let's go to the next slide, Shannon. So we're going to step through each step now, starting with step 1, the functionalization step. This is a summary of that step and those results. So we've broken down all the different cost elements of the utility into one of those 4 functions. About 44% of the utility's costs are related to power generation. So those would be the costs that you're incurring from your power suppliers to secure that power. A little over 50% of the costs are related to distribution, which makes sense. You're primarily a distribution utility. If we think about the assets you own, they're primarily distribution assets. And so all the costs that go into operating and maintaining them are going to fall into that distribution function, which is, again, a little over half of all costs. You'll notice transmission up top at 0. You know, based on discussion with staff and reviewing your line item asset records, you do not own or operate or maintain any local transmission infrastructure. So there's nothing that ends up in that function. And finally, the 4th function is dedicated customer type costs, which make up about 4% of the total cost breakdown.
Can I ask a quick question on this slide?
Sure.
So the distribution, if I'm understanding correctly, because I'm still trying to make sure I understand the customer aspect, because I thought in one of the slides, it was saying that the customers was related to billing and so it'd be personnel, it'd be more of the O&M minus the power generation. But you're putting part of, or most of the O&M cost in distribution and only a part of the O&M cost in customer. Because is this cost this is a general cost and not the fiscal year 27 cost? Or I'm trying to make sure I understand exactly what these costs are related to.
Sure. So this is a look at fiscal year 2027 as our test year. So we've isolated all the different cost elements that make up the fiscal year 27 revenue requirement, and we've, allocated them to one of these functions. You're seeing the large percentage in distribution since, all the assets you own are distribution-related assets. You think about your substations, transformers, poles, wires, those are all distribution-related assets. And so a large part of the folks that you're employing are there operating or maintaining those assets, or supporting the folks out in the field who are operating or maintaining those assets. So since they are there to, maintain or operate the distribution-related assets, their costs end up in that distribution function.
This slide confused me too. So $10 million for distribution. Now that is not, I'm thinking that's what we own and we use to distribute power. Am I looking at that correctly, or is that how much we spend in this is fiscal year 27? I'm confused about all three of these. Am I the only one?
But what,
I was assuming that the distribution was what they control, that the substations, the transformers.
I mean, it's
the whole-
basically
all
how
of
much
that.
how much how much the infrastructure we have is worth, correct?
No, not worth.
Cost.
How
What
much
it
it
costs the
costs.
business, operation and maintenance, yes.
cost just for
So
this year?
where
just
does the
for this-
customer come in, the $721,000?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but that would be like meters or something along those lines, I would
Meters,
think so, yeah.
billing,
Yeah.
So if we were gonna break even for this fiscal year, we would collect $20 million. I don't remember the budget.
Yeah.
Am I looking at that correctly?
So I'm sure these numbers are pretty correct. We gave Paul quite extensive information. So as an overall functional cost breakdown, yes.
We're collecting $20 million
We're
approximately.
what it's costing us.
And not that we're collecting, but we're collecting
Right.
somewhat
So
close
this
to it.
is cost of service.
Cost
So,
that we
yeah,
pay.
So what we just discussed was how do we get the money to pay for this?
Okay, I understand
Yeah.
now. I wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
understood.
so that was
And
the
for
first
people out
portion,
there, too.
revenue, and now it's cost.
Okay, I got it.
And is this included in capital, is capital included in this?
It includes the money that we need to generate in fiscal year 27 to fund our capital program.
Capital for
Through-
2027?
Some of the capital program is funded through existing reserves, which, isn't shown in your annual operating costs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little bit, but I think that's the thing I think, because what I would like to discuss towards the end, but maybe just bring it up again, just so as we're viewing this, is that we talked a couple different times about these rate study and stuff, and part of it's based on science and formulas and stuff, and I think a little bit is a little bit's art. In that you have to understand how things might, you need to look at the different aspects, and I think distribution is one of those. Because it depends on how heavily because I think distribution goes pretty heavily into the residential rate. And so if you're putting a large amount of money into distribution, that's gonna gear more towards how you're saying who's overpaying or underpaying. So I think there's a little bit of art to go into it, so I don't want to necessarily go here, because we're trying to get the numbers out, but I just want people to remember that $10 million is a big number, and it depends how it gets broken out. When we do see as we've seen in the packet, we see how some of these things are they're saying 200% paying above what they should.
Well, that's going to come out in the slide.
Yes,
I think.
yes.
Yeah,
And so I just get it there, because I just want to make sure being that it's distribution, you only have the 4, and transmission really doesn't rely to that, because their transmissions is in the power generation cost. It could be a little bit, you've got to be a little careful how you see that final slide of who's overpaying or underpaying. And that's,
Yeah, well, one thing I would like to add, just quickly if possible, because I think it's important as we go through both the water and the electric, is that these practices, this methodology that is being used, how you break costs up between these power, distribution, customer, transmission, is based on an industry best practice in terms of methodology that kind of identifies and helps guide how do you split your costs up into these particular categories. That goes for water as well. And so this particular piece is not as much art, as you mentioned, Larry, rate design. Yes, there's a lot more flexibility when it comes to how do you design a rate to be able to capture the revenue from your customers. That has a little bit more of the art, as you refer to, and as we refer to historically. Cost of service is a little bit more industry best practice. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
no, I appreciate that. I think a little bit when it comes to the slide, it's still, you got to take, I guess you're correct, taking the cost of service and then looking at it from there. But I just want to realize that it's not a slam dunk that distribution might be a way that it is controlled. So I apologize if I steered it wrong. I wasn't including it. This was art. This is more the science aspect, but it's still based on certain assumptions. And then those assumptions could be reviewed. And I don't think we're going to go into
That's right.
those assumptions. We don't have those times. But when you're looking at the rate design, I think it's important to think about it, the different assumptions that might have been used. Okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
All right, so let's go to the next slide, Shannon. So that last pie graph was a look at step one, taking the costs that make up fiscal year 27, all the costs of the revenue requirement, and functionalizing them to one of those 4 functions. Once we have the cost in those functions, we take each function and then we're going to further break it out into 3 cost pools, those being energy, demand, customer. So what we're really trying to ask ourselves here, or look at here, is when we look at different line item expenses, why are we incurring that expense? How are we incurring that expense? An example on energy, those are going to be costs that are generally going to change based on the amount of energy customers are using over time. A good example of costs that end up in that cost pool are going to be a lot of the power resource costs. So a lot of those power resource costs are being assessed to you on an energy basis. And so they're ending up in that energy cost pool since that's how the utility is incurring that expense. The demand cost pool are costs that are more related to maximum rate of use instead of kind of an average energy use over time. If we think about your distribution system, typically, your distribution assets are being sized to meet your customer peak, demands or needs. And so the associated operating and maintenance costs are going to some of them are going to end up in that demand cost pool, since they're based on making sure we can meet and handle our customer peaks and we don't have any brown or blackouts in the event of a peak system event. And finally, the customer cost pool. Those are, generally fixed costs that are going to change based on the number of customers you have. So things like customer billing or metering infrastructure, right? If you have more customers, you need more meters. And so that's really the main driver for that type of cost. But we're also going to include kind of backbone system infrastructure requirements in that cost pool. So if we go to the next slide, Shannon. In terms of the breakdown by cost pool, that is the pie on the left-hand side. So your costs are about 40% equal splits in energy and demand, and the remaining 20% is in that customer cost pool. What I thought might be useful is to compare, how the utility is incurring costs versus how you're currently collecting costs. So the pie on the right-hand side shows, based on the current rate schedule, where are your revenue dollars coming from? So about 90% of your rate revenue are coming from a $1 per kilowatt hour rate, energy rate. And the remaining 10% are coming from either your fixed monthly fees or a $1 per kW demand rate. So one takeaway, just comparing the two pies, is that your energy rates, your dollar per kilowatt hour rates, are collecting not just costs that you incur from energy related costs, but they're collecting costs that the utility incurs from, handling or meeting peak system needs, or some of the dedicated customer type costs. So it's more of a reference, the comparison is more of a reference when we start thinking about rate design considerations. Is this something we want to try and realign over time?
So Paul, is the demand for other municipalities is, because I think the big difference is the residents, I'm not sure if any residents pay demand, because there is a certain amount if somebody goes over 10 kilowatts, then so I don't know if any residents, but it's very minor, very minor amount of residents that would do that. So if it's either all or none of the residents are paying the demand, are any municipalities working with demand in the residential area?
Yeah, so it's a good point, Larry. So right now, you are correct. I don't want to say all, but pretty much the majority of your residential customers, they don't have metering infrastructure installed that could, read demand and bill out on a demand rate. So that's one of the primary reasons why we're collecting demand-related costs in an energy rate for residential customers. But to answer your question, there is a trend in the industry, if you have the metering capability installed, to start implementing demand rates for residential customers. It's one of the kind of an emerging trend in the industry nationwide.
It is a emerging trend in Las Vegas with Nevada Power. It's been in the news quite a bit there, and I think it's been shot down by the courts. I don't know the specifics. The last article was in the paper, but I believe they suspended it for a while. They're still fighting it out to get this demand charge. And apparently they have the metering to do that, and we don't. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah.
But I believe the current meters we're changing out, we'll have that, if I understand correctly. We're looking at changing the meters out or adding to them.
Wasn't there a test going on right now?
There's a pilot
A small
going on.
portion.
Yep, and we're actually in the middle of reviewing the contract for Tantalus to move forward.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because it's I'm trying to set the stage, because this is probably a big point of how you would look at the rate design.
No, that's a great point, because it's definitely prudent here, so it's a good point to bring up.
So just,
I was curious too, and you probably know a little bit about this. Solar power is ideal for demand, correct?
Until about 7 or 8
depends.
o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But
it's-
demand goes down at that point. It's 11 to 7, isn't it? Is peak
A
demand?
little bit later.
I just was curious. I mean, I don't think we have a lot of solar power in Boulder City compared to out there in the valley. But I would think it does affect our demand costs a little bit here. It makes them better than worse. And I guess you guys probably, Paul, you guys probably don't even look at that, I would assume, but.
Yeah, I don't think we took a deep dive into net metering look for you all, but it depends. It's on a utility by utility basis. Depend when you're peaking and when the sun's out. So if you're not, you're peaking early in the morning or after people get off work when, it's not as sunny out, not necessarily overlapping at the right time, but if your peak's more in the afternoon hours, then yeah, it could help.
Yeah, this is why we're so diverse in our portfolio,
Yeah.
because we can't rely on just the one.
and we need, that might be another one. When you're looking at the rate design, takes a little bit in consideration to the cost of service. I think one point since we brought it up, Mike, you might have a better idea, for instance, the hospital. So the hospital has solar now, and I'm not sure if they're supplying half the amount, but it's in the further slide, it shows that they're paying over their amount. With the solar, you have a demand issue, but you also have if the solar goes down, we have to supply that. So they're going to be paying less for infrastructure now that they've got the solar, and we're going to have to make it, and the rest of the rate's going to have to make up for that. Because they still have to have, especially at night, they still have to have a certain amount. So anyway, those are things that are a little bit different. That's not necessarily art, but you have to take in some of these considerations that aren't necessarily obvious in arts. And so that's just something to go forward with.
Right, and I'm sure that the hospital has alternative power on.
Just a comment on that. We don't have enough solar installed in our town yet to really make much of a significant difference on demand charge. When we design a larger system, we only factor about 50% of a demand reduction because, air conditioners still turn on at night, on commercial.
That seems like quite a bit, though, really. If you look at the peak demand, it's probably about 4 o'clock, I would think.
Yeah.
When 7 o'clock, it's got to be a
It's,
lot
uh,
less than 4 o'clock.
No,
at night.
no, not this time of year.
Between 4 and 9.
Yeah, over the years, yeah, it's changed. It used to be until about 6, because but now what happens is people come home, and about between 6 and 8, they crank the
I didn't realize
air
that.
conditioner up.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think the last couple of years, they've expanded the peak time frame.
Some of us wait till 9.
Some. Yeah. So anyway, again, just trying to point out things to remember as we get toward, because I think there's less discussion overall on the cost of service and more on the rate design, but sort of if you get to set the stage to understand what to bring out of the cost of service into the rate design is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and just for a reference point, we did look at, some monthly peaking information for the system. So looking at the data we had, the monthly peaks were occurring either 6 p.m. or like 7, 8 a.m. in the morning.
In the morning, huh?
Say that again? The peak was at
So-
7 to 8 in the morning?
As people,
Yeah,
as
or-
people got up and got ready for
No,
work.
he's saying the peaks were 5 to 6 at night
No, is that night or in the morning?
to 7 to 8 in the morning. So 2 peaks,
Oh.
right?
Well, yeah, depending on what month we looked at, it either happened.
Oh, so you're
5,
talking about the
6
winter
p.m.
time versus
or-
the summer? Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you crack up
Just
the
as a
heater as you get up in the in the winter to get ready for work.
Well, I would be curious about when, it'd be nice to see a schedule of when Boulder City actually peaks out in July and August and June. I would assume it'd be around 5 or 6 o'clock, but maybe I'm all off. I don't know.
Yeah, I think.
And the
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the last thing I wanted to mention here, Larry, is just back to your point about art and science. You can see there's kind of a difference here how we're collecting revenue versus how the utility's kind of incurring costs. When we think about rate design, the art is then in the policy. Maybe we want to keep the way we're collecting revenue like the pie on the right? Or maybe we want to make some tweaks to try and get it closer to cost, but that's kind of where the art comes in determining how we want to collect the dollars for the utility.
Right, and yeah, I think it depends. So you've already taken into some account or most of the account of Boulder City policies, but you still need to review policies, and there's other things to say why we're here now, and do we really? Because this one would be a big change, and so you would definitely phase this in a slower amount if you wanted to go with something like that. But you would want to understand. You'd have more factors to understand, I would believe.
Right, correct.
And you'd want to balance out more of the pie to the right, correct? That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, so it's jumping ahead a little to rate design considerations, but yes, balancing how you're collecting revenue so it better aligns how the utility's incurring costs would be kind of ideal. But again, it goes back to, policy considerations. If that's not something that is, you want to consider or council wants to consider, then that's the policy decision there.
Yeah, I think with Boulder City, I don't see balancing. I don't see balancing it. I can't see balancing it. If you want to increase the demand and figure out a way to do it, but I can't see that Boulder City.
Right,
You'd have to do a large demand to the residents, I think, to balance it out.
Sure. More, I'm saying bring it a little more balanced, not saying you're going to balance it.
Okay, sorry, I
Yeah,
misunderstood.
That's okay.
Sure. So if we move to the next slide, Shannon. So we talked about step 2, so getting our costs into those cost pools. Once we have the cost by cost pool, we can then allocate it to our different customer groups based on how they're using the system. So in this table, the row at the very top, we have our 3 cost pools: customer, energy, demand. Within each cost pool, we can have some subgroups depending on the types of costs that the utility is incurring. So an example is if we look at that customer cost pool, we have those two subgroups, one called accounts, one called meters and services. The account subgroup are costs like billing that are really changing or varying based on the number of accounts that are in the system. And so those types of costs are going to be allocated to our customer groups based on the number of accounts that they represent within the system as a whole. But there are also customer costs related to, meters, ancillary services, where if you're a larger customer, you require a larger, more expensive meter. It requires some ancillary metering components to be installed. All that costs more money than like a smaller residential meter. So since it costs on a customer basis more relative to a smaller meter, we developed a weighted account allocation, taking into account that, again, larger customers with larger meters should share larger responsibilities and those types of costs. Before we dive into those percentages a little bit, I wanted to look at that second row. So this is a kind of a reference for you all. We've broken down each cost pool and subgroup into percentages of the total revenue requirement, just to give you a sense of how much costs or how much of the total costs end up in each one of those buckets. And then if we start looking at the table, on the left-hand side, we're listing your different customer groups. That second column shows you, based on the current rate schedule, what percentage of the overall revenue comes from each group. And then the numbers to the right of that are for each cost pool and subgroup, what percentage of the total does each class represent, and what percentage of the total, of those costs will be allocated to each class. So if we look at residential as an example, they, of your total rate revenue, they represent about 58% of that total. If we look at how they're using the system, the number of accounts that they represent in the total system, or that weighted account metric, is between 63 and 87%. They use about 63% of the total energy in the system. And then if we think about how they're peaking relative to others, they're between 70, 74%, depending on which grouping we're looking at. So just comparing that current revenue share of 58% to the percentages that they make up in these different units of usage shows you they're 58% of the total, but in terms of how they're using the system, they're between 63 and 87% of the total. So regardless of whatever cost we're looking at, whether it's energy related, customer related, or demand related, they are currently under collecting from those costs. The other customer I will point out in this table is that primary time of use customer group towards the middle. And if I focus your attention all the way to the right, in that demand subgroup called secondary non-coincidental peak, you'll see a 0% allocation for them for those types of costs. The reason they are not getting allocated costs in that demand subgroup is because they own and operate their own secondary distribution system. So they own some of their own poles, wires, transformers. And since they own those assets, they're responsible for maintaining them, or for replacing them. They should not be responsible for paying for the city's secondary distribution system. I just wanted to point that one out. That's a unique type of customer on the system. So we've gone through step one, the functionalization step. Then we moved to step two. We got our costs into those three cost pools. Once we have the cost by cost pool, we're going to allocate them to our different customer groups based on how they're using the system. And so Shannon, if you go to the next slide, this is where we're going to take a look at the overall cost of service results. So in this graphic, what we're showing you here is relative to the revenue that they are bringing in, what percentage of that revenue is collecting or is collecting the cost. So, and I'll get into an example in a moment. In this graphic, you see that solid black line at 100%. That represents that cost of service target for each customer group. You'll notice there's a dashed orange line above and below that solid black line at 100%. What those orange lines represent is what we call the range of reasonableness. So when we look at cost of service results, we have that target, we have that cost to serve result, which is that 100% line. But since, things can change over time, let's say you sign up for a new power resource and the way you're incurring that cost is quite a bit different from all your other costs right now. That'll shift the results a little bit. You could have things like electrification with folks buying EVs, electrifying their homes, where their demand profiles will actually be changing over time, and that's going to affect how costs get allocated to them. So since things are changing, the cost of service is essentially a moving target over time. As long as we can get our revenue within that plus or minus 10% range of reasonableness, we can say that we're charging those customers based on what it costs us to serve them. So if we look at the graphic, what we found is that for your residential and municipal customers, their revenue is coming in less than what it costs us to serve them. So if we look at residential, their revenue is about 82% of what it costs us to serve that customer class as a whole. On the other side, the majority of your commercial customers, their revenue is coming in a little bit higher than what it costs us to serve them on an annual basis. The other item I will mention here is, we're looking at these results. There's a few folks out of line here. The findings that we're showing here are consistent with the trends that were found in the last rate study that was performed, I think, 5 or 6 years ago now. So before I move on to the next slide, I just want to pause. Any questions or comments on this one?
Yeah, I think this is the one I was sort of referring to in some of the other slides, because I think it's important. I think one of the major important things to look at is that these were established when I took a quick look at the past resolutions. If I'm understanding correctly, I think the last time that, for instance, the general or the secondary time of some of the time of use was established and or looked at was 2002. So it's been over 20 years since the rate structure for some of these have been done, and it'd be interesting to know if we have any history of how we established those. Part of it, like time of use, to my knowledge, was, as an example, was sort of like, not trying to get it off too much, but as an example, is like data center. Things that are necessarily not a major, the citizens or even the tourists are not getting an advantage of, and we don't want to increase our resources for something that's not necessarily benefiting the tourism or the resident or the city. So I think that was part of the thing, but the time and use, I believe, if I understood correctly in past meetings, and so you would think that they might pay a little bit more because of some of the situations. So those are things that we have to take into consideration when we look at the rate design. And so these are things we don't want to say, oh, look, we're way out of whack. We have to try to figure out. First, we want to know if there was a reason that this was interpreted that way, and then go on. So it'd be nice to understand if there's any way we can know why some of these were established in the late 90s and early 2000s. But like I said, they haven't been looked at since then, so we definitely want to do that. So that would be the next step, is trying to figure out how we use this cost of service to go again and not use, because you're looking at a major shift from commercial to residence if we try to put everything into this 100%, within this 10% band.
I had a question too on, you mentioned commercial. Which one of these categories is commercial? It really doesn't say that.
Yeah, so your general service rate schedule captures the majority of your commercial customers.
Okay, and these representations are, I mean, you said, what, 68 to 80% of the power is used by residential, so this really doesn't reflect the amount of power being consumed. It just shows that this guy might only use 1% of the power, but he's paying 2% of it. And it's a small percentage, like these 269% and 252%. That's a very small percentage of the power that's paid for, correct?
Yeah, you're correct. This doesn't show the
So it's kind
dollar.
of confusing. It just shows that people are paying more than they're getting for, but it's still a small amount. Residential is still pulling in the majority of the money. Just for the audience out there, if there's anybody listening.
Well, I agree with you, Rand, and that's what, yeah, we're all trying, that's what we're saying. We don't want to look at this thing and go, oh, wow, we got to change.
Yeah.
We have to change a lot. This is just a starting point that we would consider and then go forward from there. But try to understand the reasoning that there might be more out of whack than we think, if that's the proper term. Any
Yeah,
other
so
comments?
Shannon, if we can go to the next slide. So we started to, or you all started to kind of hit on some of these considerations. What George went through is fiscal year 27, we're proposing a 5% across the board. So this would be for future considerations, the fiscal year 28, 29 increases. Number one is, we've looked at the cost of service results. We found there is some misalignments. Do we want to start addressing that in the future? And generally, we would recommend doing that very gradually over time through some sort of phase-in. What that means, as an example, if the electric utility as a whole is targeting a 5% increase in, an annual rate increase, if a customer group needs to increase their revenue closer towards cost of service, their increase would need to be higher than that 5%. On the other side, if a customer needs to bring down, their revenue collection towards the cost of service target, their increase would be less than the overall system increase, which at this point is the proposed 5%. So that's number one is this something we want to address, maybe put together some phase-in options to see how that might look. And then number two, when we get to the rate design and rate structural considerations, there's a few I'm highlighting here. These aren't necessarily the only considerations we can bring in, but these are some of the ones that stuck out to us as we reviewed. So number one, one of the reasons or larger reasons why the residential results from cost of service are the way that they are is that monthly customer charge. So the monthly customer charge right now is $12.50. If we look at the cost of service and what the cost-based monthly charge should be, it should be around $38 if we truly wanted to, be cost-based and collect the fixed costs that the utility is incurring. So there's a misalignment there, and that could be where we target or look at some rate structural changes. Number two is for all customers, there is a $1 per kilowatt hour charge that is designed to recover the cost of your power resources. Right now, it's a uniform rate. I think it's 6.25 cents or so. Do we want to, change that into a tiered rate where the first tier, all classes would get some allocation of your cheaper hydro resources, and then your second tier would encompass, market purchases or more expensive power resources, which again would better align how you're recovering revenue with how the utility is incurring it, right? Third consideration is for that delivery charge, which is also recovered on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis for residential customers. That is currently tiered. You have a 4-tier system in that charge. From a cost perspective, there isn't a good cost perspective or justification to have a tiered delivery charge. So do we want to change that to a uniform charge, or maybe no, by policy we want to, keep it tiered, or we want to look at modifying tiers? What do we want to do? Fourth consideration there, one of the reasons we see the commercial results the way they are is commercial customers have that delivery charge, $1 per kilowatt hour, but they also have a demand charge. Those two charges are there to collect the same type of costs. They're there to collect your distribution-related costs for delivering power. Typically, those are recovered through a dollar per kW or demand charge if you have the metering infrastructure for those types of folks. So for those customers who have the metering infrastructure, do we want to combine the delivery and demand charge to just, $1 per kW charge? And the final consideration I'm listing here, one of the reasons why municipal customer results are the way they are is currently they are not charged a delivery charge at all. So do we want to start implementing a delivery charge for them, which would help improve their cost share? So again, a lot of considerations to think about, and these are not the only ones we can look into or consider as we move forward. We've created the model tool set where we can look at all these or more if we want to. So that's what we've prepared to do. And as we've talked about, these cost of service or rate design considerations would be for a fiscal year 28 or future increase, and it's going to be something that city staff we will be looking at over the next year or so, based on the input we get from you and what we're finding during our reviews.
Well, can I?
Paul, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Paul, I might just add, because I wanted to emphasize just that we have completed the cost of service and the rate design. Like we had provided a rate cost of service phase-in for consideration. Some of the rate structure changes do have that template in the model, and so we have completed that. So I just didn't want there to be the thought of that none of this rate design has been completed. We have the templates in place for the majority of them. Some we actually came up on our own to say, yeah, we'd like to maybe study that a little bit more. We would suggest consideration of studying that more. But just due to the impact some of these changes could have, the city did want to look a little bit more, as George, you'd mentioned, to, what was the history? Why was it established? Was it a policy-based decision that, designed this rate or has this rate how it is, or was it something different? And so just a little bit more information was wanted to be gathered in order to figure out how to prioritize some of these rate structure changes.
Now, so will there be additional meeting with the consultant and the city to discuss the design then?
It sounds like the city's going to do some research on their own in terms of, and prioritizing some of these particular rate structure changes that we have offered as recommendations.
Okay, so,
This is George. So they've given us the template for being able to look at some of these changes and how they would affect the overall rate. I think it's fair to say that there's a constituency or advocacy group for each rate class that'll have an opinion on how to change it or not to change it. And so there's a lot of art in trying to decipher. There are some that have more impact. There's also third rail issues. I can tell you from working with many utilities, fixed charges are a main political concern over trying to change those. So we will get the template that will allow us to look at what has happened. And also, I'm wondering from FCS, is it your experience that the deltas in what is being served and how much it's being cost, are those by commission, or do those just evolve organically over time without people deciding how one class is going to get a better deal than another class? Is that by design, or does it actually just happen organically?
So from my experience, I would say it happens more organically. It's not, council or the policymakers deliberately saying we're going to charge these folks less. It's just something that's happened over time with the way we've set rates, with the policy decisions we've made on the rate structural elements themselves.
just to help, if I can help clarify, I believe less, I would believe that's correct, that that's been developed over time or just it happened. But if I understand correctly, through city staff that was here, in a sense retired, but was part of the other committee that was part of the first committee, when we discussed this, it was stated that some of the like time of use and stuff like that was originally set to try, as I said earlier, to try to see, okay, what was a fair aspect for the city, and definitely did not want somebody to come in and use Hoover power because they saw how cheap Hoover power was, come to Boulder City and establish some type of commercial manufacturing or something that really didn't have much bearing on the city, but it would definitely take their resource. That was just an example. So there is a little bit that was intentional and a lot that's not. But if I could, I just want to, again, to set the stage, and as we go forward, if I could help a little bit with those considerations. With the considerations in that okay, can you hear me? Because I've got it, I've seen the green light. No, okay, it gets us hot.
You're back.
We're back, okay. So the cost of service, that is something we definitely, so the service charge is something we definitely want to look at. I think when we first started this in 2019, with the electrical and the water, I think they were looked at separately, and the costs were definitely different, and they are different now, $12 compared to $27 for service charge. So it's something that is definitely, but I think we need to do is we need to look at the definition and to get an understanding of what the city thinks, what the council thinks, maybe even get an understanding of what the residents sort of think. I think that's one of the big differences that I thought I've heard with the staff and the consultants meeting is that what the standard is for the service charge and what we're doing is different. So it's something, so I don't know if we don't want to necessarily drastically change. So you were talking about the $12 to the $38. We just need to look at that and see what we want to do. So the develop the tier energy and the uniform, just to make sure that it's, maybe I'm being Captain Obvious here, but I think what we'd be looking at, just to make sure everybody understands, is that you would basically reverse what we're currently doing. So currently we've got an average energy and a tiered delivery charge, so I think the recommendation would be reversing that. And that might not be a bad idea, is because you would say, okay, who's using the most and who's causing us to get into another tier of buying electricity instead of a delivery charge being in the tier. So that's something, but I just want to make sure, when I first read that, I didn't quite catch that. I want to make sure that people were thinking, because that was something that might be something to look at as far as the rate design. And the demand charge, it'd be nice if the committee can understand a little bit how they're collecting the delivery and the demand and how those how the rates are working before we change that. So, and then the same thing with the municipality. That's another discussion. It would be increasing the city paying more than wholesale, and it's another big discussion.
I had a couple comments. You mentioned something about commercial businesses in the city pay a demand charge. They're not all metered for demand, are they?
Yes.
All the commercial businesses are in town, like hotels and businesses and restaurants. They're all demand. They pay a demand charge based on their type of meters that they have that can record that. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, so not all of your commercial customers have a demand meter, but I want to say most of them do. I think the threshold is if you end up above 50 kW, I'd have to look at the ordinance, but if you have a month or a series of months where your demand is 50 kW or above, you get a demand meter installed, and you get started charging demand. So that's for your general service class, where most of your commercial customers are. For all of the larger commercial businesses, so the large general service, primary, secondary, time of use, they all have demand meters and are assessed a demand charge right now.
So it's all big business, not the little guys, right? Pretty much. I mean, like motels and I imagine the school district but the little mom and pop restaurants and.
No, they have demand.
They have demand. Okay, I was just curious about that. I was wondering, you said we pay $12 per resident for the cost, fixed cost?
Flat fee.
Flat fee. Well, how does that compare to Vegas? I was curious. Did you look at that at all? I mean, Henderson or Vegas?
Yeah,
Nevada
we
power
did.
charges?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but we can certainly get back to you. We did a rate survey. I just don't have that number off the top of my head.
Okay, I was just curious if you knew. And the same thing with the tiered. And everybody pays the same, correct? Any residence that's 10,000 square feet versus 2,000 square feet, they all pay the same, or is it based on the size of the service? It's not based on the size of the service, correct? It's just residential.
Correct.
Okay.
It's just residential.
I was curious if other cities in this area have, if they follow that same model, or if we're unique, or, and also the tiered rates, if they're, I know ours aren't, there's not a lot of difference, at least I look at my bill, I see that. And I was curious about if you're looking at how the other municipalities do it, how much they get the people that have these huge homes that consume huge amounts of electricity, and if they're paying a higher tiered rate than Boulder City would be. I would think that would be something we might want to look at also.
I was able to find NV Energy's residential base charge. It's $18 per month
So they're 50% more than we are.
for residential, and then their commercial basic service charge is $98 a month.
And what does Boulder City pay? Any idea?
I have to look up Boulder
Okay.
City's commercial one. Give me just a moment.
Okay.
If I might weigh in, one of the things we have to keep in mind with a residential rate is while the $12 a month seems low in relation to $38 per address, we can't charge a little house on 6th Street, jump all the way up to $38 because that's their shared cost. We're going to really have to look at that.
No, I totally agree, and that's what I was trying,
Yeah.
we need to define the cost of service
Yeah.
and stuff. So that's been the problem, because in the old resolutions, for example, the cost it was a service charge for water was basically around the meter cost.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, when you looked at some of that going, okay, are these really the meter costs? And then no, so then the definition was modified, but it still was not a clear what it was. So if I understand correctly, one of the things that the FCS has pointed out is that they're saying more of the fixed cost, if I'm saying correctly, your salaries and all that, or they're taking that, what are your general costs, or would be the fixed charge. And that's a major change from what we've been doing, so you would definitely want to figure that out. So that's why I was trying to point it, so I totally agree with what you're saying.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, you think, water is based on the size of the meter, isn't it? The feed, like it's a 1-inch feed or a 1.5-inch feed.
Yes.
You would think housing would be the size of the service. If you got a 100-amp service, those old homes have a 60-amp service, unless they modified it, a 100-amp service. Some homes probably got a 350-amp service, because they have a huge demand. You kind of think it would be based on that, but, it might be something to look at. But, of course, that would be hard to determine, or maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know.
So I would say it's good that we do a rate study every 3 or 4 or 5 years so we can look at these things as the technology improves, as metering improves, like that. In fairness to the consultants and the committee, I think we should move forward so we can get into the water side and take a look at that, because I think you're pretty much done, Paul, with the electric side.
Yeah, I got one more slide.
Okay, perfect.
And then while I change that, just to note, for commercial electric without a demand meter is $18 per month, and with the demand meter, it is $60 per month.
And you said Vegas was how much?
It's $90.
Okay.
There you go, Paul.
Thank you, Shannon. So this slide is not related to cost of service. This goes back to what George was talking about earlier on the revenue requirement. So this would be for the fiscal year 27, this October's 5% rate adjustment. We wanted to show you just some impacts for the residential customers. This is a proposed across-the-board adjustment. So what that means is the 5% would be applied to all rate components equally. It would affect, all customers by 5%. So in that table there, we've shown you different monthly energy totals from 300 to 2,500 kilowatt hours, what their existing bill is today under those amounts, what the proposed bill would be under that 5% adjustment, and then the dollar and percentage change. I've also noted some different common usage profiles. So for your non-summer monthly average periods, the average residential usage is around 900 kilowatt hours. With the proposed adjustment, it would increase that monthly bill by about $5 or 5%. Annual average is around 1,150 kilowatt hours. That bill would go about $6, which again is also 5%. The summer monthly average is about 1,600 kilowatt hours per month, so that's an $8 increase on that proposal. And if we look at your summer monthly peak average, that's around 1,900 kilowatt hours. And under the proposal, it's about a $9.50 increase. The reason we chose this range between 300 and 2,500 kilowatt hours is this captures about 90% of all residential bills, with the remaining 10% being higher than that 2,500 kilowatt hours.
So Paul, are you taking all of the residential revenues divided, or whichever way, divided by the amount of kilowatts used? So you don't really have the different categories broke out here. You're just doing a summation, I'm assuming.
And what do you mean by the categories? Just
Okay, so the average summer, the 1,600, that would, I still seemed like that would be, I've got a new HVAC system. I have a 1,600 square foot house, and my average summer is probably about 2,000. And so for
Sure.
1,600, I'm having a hard time, and I know we have a whole bunch of 2,000 square foot houses in Boulder City, so I have a hard time believing that's an average amount. So again, that, I don't want to get into it, but I'm just curious how that 1,600 came up as an average.
That's
Yeah,
right.
so we look, oh, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was gonna say your statistics, correct?
Yeah, so we looked at the past 3 years of usage data, just, looking at different time periods, dividing those usage amounts by the number of residential accounts to come up with those.
Okay,
average
that's
numbers.
what I thought. So yeah, you're taking the average, the high and the low. You're not, okay, so it's just, you're not really showing the extreme high. Okay, that's what I thought.
It'll still be 5%, however. So even if you were at 5,000, if they had used the same 5,000, it would still show that it's 5% impact.
No, I understand that. You're just, once you get into 5,000, you're on the fourth tier, and that's when the money is, you're gonna see a big change, especially yearly. It's gonna get in their pocket. But it is what it is. I was just trying to understand.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense, Larry, there's only about 2% of bills end up in that fourth tier.
Okay.
It's a very, very small amount of customers.
But you got a reasonable amount that comes into the third tier, I would imagine, in the peak of the winter with electrical for the electrical people, and in the peak of the summer, you're going to get into that third tier pretty much, I would think, which is above 2,000. So,
Correct, yeah.
okay,
Okay, moving on.
yeah. So,
So with that, those are the electric slides. So I think we'll move on to the water presentation, which Angie will be delivering.
I think, Shannon, you have those slides, right? Yep. So you're going to see some similar slides and processes. So as we talk about water and the cost of service, we start with that revenue requirement that we need, and we're going to allocate those costs by function. As you see here, obviously different than electric. We have the customers similar, but we're looking at fire protection, base capacity, and we're going to take those costs and allocate them to the customer classes: residential, potable, non-potable, commercial, and golf courses. And so we'll take a little bit deeper dive into each of those costs and expenses on the next slide.
so
We're
can I start
looking-
here? And I
Sure.
guess on this slide and the next slide, the effluent, is that related to the quarry, or is that related?
Correct.
Okay, so that's not
100% to the
related to all
quarry.
the water? Okay,
Just
thank you.
100% the quarry, yep, you got it. So on that slide 3, just taking a deeper dive into each bucket. We'll look at customer. And those costs associated with maintaining the customer, the administrative piece. If you look at the meter and services, again, those repairs and meters and services, the base, what do you need to have to be year-round? We're looking at the peak, when you have to provide the capacity for those customers, when you have that higher than average volume. The city requirements for the fire protection. The raw water, the non-potable, those costs associated with sourcing and conveying the untreated water. And then again, the effluent, those costs that are related to the quarry. And on this pie chart, we can see how those expenses and those costs are broken out. Your highest is to base at 43.6, raw at 26.8. You can see that customer is a small piece of that, the 5.3, and then how the others kind of are part of the chart. So we have a similar chart on slide 5, which is what Paul had shown as well. How we're going to assign those functions to customer groups. And I did take a look at this too. Overall, residential is about 52% of the requirement. So the rest of them make up the other 48%. But if we're looking at the percentage of revenue requirement on that second line, and you see the 5.3 under customer and the meters are 2.5, that's your revenue requirement. And those are the percentages that we were just looking at the pie chart. If we take customer, for example, you can see that of that 5.3% associated to that cost, 90% of that cost is going to residential. And you can look at even like base, when we have that 43.6% for residential is absorbing 50% of that cost. And so it's just showing you bucket by bucket or column by column, the functions and how those relate to each customer class. And then obviously underneath the percentage of revenue requirement is how those costs are allocated. You know, by customer, it's going to be by account. For meters and services, it's going to be those meter capacity equivalents. So I'll just stop here a minute and see if there's any like overall questions as we look at this chart.
I don't think there's any.
I
Okay.
just make, everybody realizes, yeah, I guess the city potable and the city non-potable, most of that is the golf courses. Is that correct?
I think that city golf, yeah, then we have the private golf courses separate.
Correct.
Which we're going to, see in the next slide how that kind of shakes out.
Can you just take a minute to just to explain how we get raw water? I'm kind of confused about that. I mean, does it sent right over via SNWA or?
Yes,
Yes.
Yep.
It is, okay.
it
And
is,
it
yeah.
comes from the top over here, Henderson side. Comes into our
Correct.
city that way.
Oh, okay, so it's two different pipelines, okay.
Yep. 2 different feeds.
So then if we're going on to the next for cost of service, results, again, orienting you to this slide, you have the dashed black line, which is the exact cost of service at the 100% mark, and then you have that range of reasonableness, 10% either side. And you can see as we're looking at this, residential is just at that kind of bottom tier, under collecting. If we looked at our commercial classes, they are slightly over collecting. You notice that the private golf courses in the quarry are pretty much off the chart. And I think it's I made a really good point when we were talking on electric. Even though they're at that 200% range and beyond, they're smaller impacts in a dollar sense, but it's showing that they are over collecting when we're looking at their cost of service results. And part of that is tied to the fact that with the private golf course, it's tied to the residential per policy, and then the quarry was tied to commercial rates. So that drives those results as well.
So when you say tied to the residential rate, what do you mean by that?
So if residential is going up by 5, so is private golf course.
They get the same rate, correct?
Same rate, yes.
Okay, compared to where the municipality, they